throughout the time working there, there was like an older chef de partie who always tell me like, hey, like, you're not good at this. Like, go do something else. And even at home, when I cooked for my older brother, like I'll cook him a pork loin and I'll overcook it. Come on, I'm like 16-year-old, and he'll be like, hey, like, you don't have to be a chef. There's other things out there you can do. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to prove you wrong.
This is The Crackling. I'm Anthony Huckstep. When Khanh Nguyen was a child, picking herbs and helping in the kitchen was his mother's way of disciplining him for errant behaviour. But he grew to love the connection he was forming with both the ingredients and techniques that underpin the food of his Vietnamese heritage. It led to a career in food and a determination to take Vietnamese and Southeast Asian cuisine to new heights down under. Khanh, you've been making a name for yourself with some extraordinary dishes like pork lattice Wellington and banh mi en croûte. Where do these ideas come from?
I guess all these ideas come from lying in bed late at night or early in the morning, just thinking about what I could do that's different and exciting. I guess a lot of it is also inspiration from, traveling around and eating around. I eat a lot. I love eating out, just, checking out restaurants and seeing new things. And yeah, in the last 12 years of my career, I've spent, a lot of money investing in eating out and kind of just learning about different things. And, sometimes when I think about a dish or like I want to create a new dish, it just things pop into my head from, places that I've eaten. Sometimes like I can walk on the street and I can smell like a scent coming from a restaurant, and I'd be like, something just pops in my head and I wouldn't know where it comes from. But yeah, like I guess inspiration can come from anywhere.
Well, that pork crackling lattice is pretty extraordinary. What were the challenges in getting that right?
So with the, I think, second lockdown in Melbourne, the first lockdown was a bit of a write-off. It was just like me working my ass off, trying to get busy enough so I can employ my staff again, because everyone was kind of stood down, right? And so that was just, it was hard, the first lockdown. And then we reopened for 3 weeks and got into lockdown again. And with the second lockdown, I was like, I need to do something different. I need to learn a new skill, because the first lockdown I didn't really do much, of anything that's, self-development. So I always wanted to make pate en croûte. It was something that looked really hard to do. I was kind of like scared of doing it because, how do you put raw meat into a pastry and then cook it? And then, it comes out with cooked pastry, cooked meat. And then when I want to learn something, I kind of just go at it until I tire myself out, basically. So I think the first maybe 2 or 3 weeks of doing this pate en croûte, like I did it every single day, and I'll do it for hours a day.
Wow.
Like there was a lot, like, and I didn't want to just do a normal pate en croûte as well. So the first one I did was a banh mi flavored one. So it was, the usual flavors of a banh mi, Vietnamese pork roll. But inside I had like a soft melting, like chicken liver pate, which like oozed out as you kind of cut into it. I wanted to kind of up that. And one of my friends said, I wonder what a pad thai pate en croûte would look like. And like I've only had pad thai a handful of times in my life, but I kind of knew what it tasted like, and I knew there was egg in it. So I was like, what would be cool if I had eggs inside the pate en croûte, cooked perfectly with a runny yolk. And it actually, like, I've seen it done before. Josh Nyland did one many years ago at Cafe Nice. So it was inspired by that. And yeah, just like cooking it to the perfect temperature where you can cut into it and the egg yolk just oozes out. It's, I don't know, I just kind of got lucky as well, I guess. Like it worked the first time. And from then I just, I learned how to make short crust pastry. and there's a chef in Europe, in London, that I've been following called Callum Franklin, and he does really amazing things with pastry as well. So I guess a lot of the inspiration is also from him. And again, just what can I do differently? What can I wrap in pastry? So, I wrapped the whole chicken in pastry, which I spent like 2 or 3 hours decorating it. Um, and like what I did was I stuffed the chicken with eggs as well in the cavity. And when we cut it open, pulled the pastry off, the chicken was like steamed inside the pastry, all the fat oozing in the pastry, which was delicious. And then I cracked open the eggs, and there were soft boiled eggs, like still runny yolk. And basically, you just kind of like break off the pastry, dip it in the yolk, and it was pretty amazing. Um, and then, yeah, I wrapped the whole fish in pastry and just kept wrapping things in pastry. And I was like, you know what? This pastry thing is probably going to get boring soon, so I need to do something different. And then I thought, oh, Wellingtons. I've never made a Wellington before. And I was like, am I just going to make a normal Wellington, though? It was my first time ever making it, and I wanted to do it different. And I was like, how can it be different? And I was like, how cool would it be if I wrapped it, made a pastry out of pork skin, and wrapped the short crust pastry in that? And initially I told a lot of people about it, and they're like, yeah, nah, it's not going to work. But like with almost everything I do, when I tell people, they're like, nah, it's not going to work. Sounds a bit crazy, eh? But then, yeah, I got lucky and it worked. And then now, like, I've kind of developed a recipe where it is, really doable. Like, there's a proper technique to it now, and it's kind of like a 99% success rate. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that.
Before we talk about your food that you're doing at the moment, and you'll be opening a new restaurant soon as well, can you take us back to when you first started and started getting interested in food?
Yeah, so I got interested in food at a pretty young age. Like, I was probably like 7 or 8 years old. Like, back then, living at home with my parents, obviously I was really young. And cooking, I mean, cooking would always be like my mum's job. And like when I get like in trouble at school or something, she would just make me help her like pick herbs, and like it was meant to be boring. Like it was meant to be like, here you go, pick all these herbs or like whatever. And I actually loved it. I was like, oh, cool. And then it's just like at that young age where I learned, where I can watch my mum use a knife and she can use it properly. She's quick at cutting things, and I just thought that it's a skill that you can constantly develop and get better at, and you can never stop learning, right? And so that's where I started loving cooking and food. And at the same time, my parents always loved fresh food as well. Like we used to like set up nets in the river near our house and illegally catch mud crabs. My dad
Wow.
would drive out for hours to the farms, and he'll bring back like ducks and chickens, and he'll run around the backyard. And I'd be like maybe, yeah, about 8 years old, and I'll come home from school, and my mum will call me to the backyard, and she's like, hey, can you hold this chicken for me? So she'll pluck out the feathers around the neck area, and then she'll slit its throat, and I'll be like 8-year-old sitting there holding a chicken upside down, watching it bleed out. I think most kids would be scarred for life, but I loved it. I was like, this is awesome. And so I think it was like around that age that I was like, you know what, I want to be a chef. Like at such a young age, I was like already thinking that this is going to be my career. And then I started high school. Obviously, had food tech as one of the courses. And sorry, the phone's ringing. So food tech as one of the courses, and the more I cooked, the more I loved it. A part of it is me because I loved eating, and I loved trying different flavors, and then in the senior years of high school, they put us through work placement, a part of the hospitality course, where you go into a restaurant for a week and kind of just suss out how it is in the kitchen. And again, I fell in love. It's like I just remember it being such a fun environment where, prep time, you can pump up the music, everyone's having a bit of banter, obviously still doing work. bantering and just having fun, laughing. And then service time, you get that adrenaline rush. And yeah, as soon as I finished high school, actually, I was going to drop out of high school at the end of year 10 to cook. But, growing up in an Asian household, my mum would be like, your aunties and uncles are never going to stop talking about this. You need to finish high school. Like, you can't just drop out. You'll make me lose face. I've came to Australia, worked so hard to put you through school, and now you just want to drop out. And I'm like, okay, mum, I'll finish year 12, which I'm so glad I did, because I don't think I'm that smart. I think if I dropped out early, I'd be pretty dumb. But yeah, so as soon as I finished year 12, I signed up at like a group training place where they find restaurants or jobs for you as an apprentice chef. And I think I had like 5 or 6 different interviews around different cafes and cafeterias and stuff. And I never heard back from them. But actually, rewinding, while I was in year 11 and 12, I worked at Macca's for a couple of months, and then I worked at Subway, where I eventually became the supervisor at Subway. But I always kind of loved to be around food. So when I dropped out of high school, I was like, I'm going to work in a proper kitchen now, and start my apprenticeship, and start cooking for the rest of my life. And yeah, I had 5 or 6 different interviews with this group training place where they got the interviews for me, but I didn't get any luck. I got interviewed, and I don't know what it was, but they just didn't want me. I just never heard back from them, or they're like, oh, that's not what we're after. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to go out there and hand my CV to a restaurant where I really want to work at. And back then it was Red Lantern, because obviously it's, one of the best Vietnamese restaurants in the country. They're awarded, and they've got, great chefs that work there. So I went out there, handed in my CV, and had my interview, had my trial, and I absolutely loved it. And at that point, there was other people getting interviewed as well. And the funny thing is, right, when I got the job, they told me, well, the sous chef told me, he's like, you know what, the other people that interviewed and trialed, we never heard back from them. That's why you got the job. And I'm like,
Wow.
are you serious? And throughout the time working there was an older chef de partie would always tell me hey, you're not good at this, go do something else. And you know what, even at Macca's, they were trying to bully me out of it. I don't know if I was bad in the kitchen or what. I wasn't a smart ass. I tried to put my head down and work my ass off, but I don't know, just something about it wasn't good enough. And so Macca's, and even at home when I cooked for my older brother, I'll cook him a pork loin and I'll overcook it. Come on, I'm 16-year-old, and I overcook this pork loin, and he'll be like, hey, you don't have to be a chef, there's other things out there you can do. And funnily enough, it was a pork loin that I overcooked, right? And he's like, there's other things out there you can do. And I'm like, you know what, I'm going to prove you wrong. But then starting at Red Lantern, there was the older guy that was also the same. So I worked there for 2 years, and I achieved a lot in 2 years there. I guess I worked my way through the whole kitchen, made it to the pass, and when it was time to leave, I wanted something challenging. I wanted something hard. I mean, the hours at Red Lantern weren't bad at all for what I kind of eventually learned the industry norm is. But then I heard about a restaurant called Bicas, and they were known as the hardest kitchen in Australia, and I was like, you know what, I want to do this. I know it's going to be good for me. So then did my trial. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but yeah, it was a 16-hour trial. And my foot was aching, and then I got the job, which I was excited about, but also really kind of shitting myself. Shit, am I going to be able to do this? It's long hours. All the chefs there work their asses off, and I actually remember my first day. So before my first day, I went to the gym and trained with a mate, and I kind of jumped on a treadmill, right? and some reason the treadmill was on like full bore, but no one running on it. So I didn't notice it was on. I jumped on the treadmill and it just shot me off the treadmill. I hit the wall, and like my ankles were screwed. Like it was like I don't know why I never got it checked up, but it was like next day I woke up, I couldn't barely walk, and this was my first day at Bacas for a 16-hour shift. So I was like limping around, and like it was so bad that after a year, my ankle wasn't healed, fully recovered yet. So yeah, I remember after my first day, went home, slept for like 3 hours because I was just worried about the next day, scared, shitting myself, like, oh man, am I gonna be able to get the prep list done? And then I remember that morning waking up to the second day at work. I woke up, I was in tears. I was like, what the hell am I doing with my life? Like, why am I doing this? Like, is it worth it? Like, you know, my body's aching, and it's only my second day. Is it going to get better? Is it going to get worse? And I was like, you know what? I've already made that decision that I'm going to be a chef, and I can't go back from it. Like, I just can't. Like, no matter how hard it is, I'm just going to push through it. And after a few months, the crazy weeks just kind of got a bit easier, and then it just became the norm where I can work like 85-hour weeks, 90-hour weeks, and I wouldn't really be that tired because at the end of the day I'm always tired anyway. So you kind of just get used to being in a state of being tired always, and yeah, you get used to it.
Bacas had many amazing chefs through its kitchens and had a real influence at that time. Well, what were some of the things? Is there any dishes that you remember doing from that era that have lived with you beyond that?
I think what drew me to Bacas was like the nose to tail cooking, where on a plate you can have like different parts of the animal. Like I remember a pork dish. Like you had the pork loin, you had to debone the tails, which got braised in like a jus, and that was one of the garnishes. And it was just a lot of the dishes were technical, and there was a lot of work on the plate to actually produce the food, which is what I loved. And I mean, it's sad that sometimes diners can't see that. Like they just see a plate of food and they're like, they eat it, is it delicious or not? And that's it. But the beauty of food is that something can look simple as well, and there can be many hours of prep that goes into it. Like for example, our roti with Vegemite curry that's on our menu. So that's kind of become our signature dish. And when you receive it, you have the roti itself, the Vegemite curry, and a little pool of like curry oil in it. And like people don't know that the Vegemite curry itself has like 30 or 40 ingredients in it.
Wow.
It takes like over an hour to make, and there's a lot of techniques that's involved with that. And then the roti itself, you got to make the dough. It needs to rest for at least like 4 hours before you can flip it. You're going to flip it until it's like thin enough to be translucent, until you can see through it. And then, having a technique to roll it, to encase butter into it, and just, rolling it in a way where, when you cook it, you get the best out of it. So, yeah, so going back to like where I was working. So after the Bicas, they were going to announce that they were closing. And at that point, I really didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know what restaurants to work at. And, at the time, Miss G's, Dan Hong's restaurant, was pretty big. So this was maybe, I mean, they're still pretty big, but like 8 years ago, they were like, one of the coolest restaurants out, right? So I wanted to work there. But then Dan, funnily enough, messaged me out of nowhere on Twitter and said, hey, I'm opening a restaurant. Do you want a job? And like, this is just like, I'm just looking up to Dan Hong, right? I didn't really know him on a personal level, and he just messaged me out of nowhere to open Mr. Wong with him. So it was a massive step for me, because Big House was 25 seats, and we did 25 covers a night, sometimes like 30 or 40, depending on the PDR. And then moving on to Mr. Wong being a 240 seat, doing over 500 covers a night was like, it was pretty scary. Like, how do I go from 25 covers to over 500 covers? And yeah, before I started, I was like, I wanted to, give it my best go. And I said to myself, I want to be the sous chef at this place eventually. And that's kind of was my goal. And funny enough, when I started at Mr. Wong, Red Lantern called me back to offer me the head chef position. And at that point, I was like 20 or 21 years old. And, I kind of asked myself if I went back to Red Lantern, like something I've already done. Like, I do love the place and love the food, but I've already done it. And if I do take that head chef position, am I going to grow to where I want to be? Like, all the learning is going to be, all from myself and how much what I do outside of work, right? But if I stayed at Mr. Wong, then I can learn from their systems, learn from Merivale. So I stayed there, and within maybe 2 or 3 months, I became the sous chef. And yeah, I spent 3.5 years at Mr. Wong, which it was really rewarding because I love the food. It's super delicious. But, what I loved about working there was just the managing and the leadership skills that you learn working there, because it's a team of over 40 chefs in the kitchen. And I think if I wanted to learn to be a leader in the kitchen, that's probably the perfect place to learn, because you got so many heads that you got to look after. And after that 3.5 years, I entered a few competitions, which I didn't do very well in. I think a lot of it was because I doubted myself. So I went into these competitions. I made it right to the end, but at the back of my head, I was like, "Am I ready to win? Like, do I really want to do this? Like, if I do win, what comes with it? Am I ready for that?" And I was just doubting myself for the whole time, right? So while I was in the competition, before I even got right to the end, I told myself, I'm not going to win this. But I told myself in 2 years' time, I want to enter them both again and hopefully do better, right? So after Mr. Wong, I did my internship at Noma for 10, 11 weeks when they were in Sydney, where I learned a lot about native ingredients. And yeah, and like after that, I didn't know what I was going to do as well. So I bumped into Brent Savage because obviously he took over the space afterwards for Sunda Dining, and he offered me a job. And he kind of asked, "What do you want?" And I was like, "I just want to learn more, and I want to see different things." And he's like, "Oh, come work for me. It's perfect. I got 3 different restaurants. You can work around the restaurants and learn as much as you want." And that's what I did. And I started as just like a chef de partie, just wanting to learn. But then within a few months, he was like, "Hey, do you want to be sous chef at any of my venues?" And I was like, you know what? Like, at that point, I was pretty young still. So I was like, I can't just go into a restaurant as sous chef and tell people how to do things as a new guy. So I was like, you know what? I'll be sous chef at Cirrus when it opens. And that's kind of what happened. And during my time there, I entered those 2 competitions again. Did worse than the first time. Yeah, and it kind of just put me in a position where I was like, what am I doing with myself? What am I doing with my life? Is this, I started doubting myself again. And there was just one day I just decided, you know what? Like, the next job opportunity I get, no matter what it is, I'm just going to take it. And a week later, like by coincidence, I get a phone call from Adi, which is the owner of Sunda. And that's where it kind of came about. And everything just fell into place like a coincidence. Like, yeah, it's pretty amazing how it all happened.
Well, you have put absolutely everything of yourself into Sunda, and it's recognised across the whole country as one of, Melbourne's best restaurants, and also leading the new wave of dining in Australia. You've won many awards already, and you're still quite young. Tell us a bit about Sunda and your food there and how it's evolved.
Yeah, so I guess when the opportunity came for Sunda, I didn't have much time to plan about it, but we kind of knew when the restaurant was going to open and when I was going to move to Melbourne. And like I planned a holiday before I moved to Melbourne, traveled Vietnam, and I basically spent a lot of money. So I kind of came to Melbourne and I didn't bring anything with me. Like I brought a duffel bag and a suitcase, a bit of clothes, a laptop with all these recipes in it, and that's all I had, right? And a month or so before opening, we went on a research trip to Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And during the trip, I lost my phone, and on my phone, I had like 10 years worth of like ideas and recipes, like ready to open a restaurant one day, and I was going to put it into use. But then I lost my phone, didn't have it backed up, and like I was kind of broken, like because my whole dream was to open a Vietnamese restaurant, and then all my ideas were just lost. But then, a part of me said, I'm on this trip already. Addie has obviously taken me on this trip for me to get inspiration. So I'm just going to make the most out of this trip and show that I can get inspired by, my surroundings and what I do. So when Sunda opened, I guess a lot of the influences was from Indonesia, Malaysia, because that's kind of, what happened there. And then when I did lose my phone, I bought a laptop and I worked my ass off, like literally sitting on my laptop for like 20 hours a day. I've probably spent like hundreds of hours on the laptop writing recipes. So when Sunda opens, I've got recipes to change the menu around a bit and just kind of keep evolving, right? And after our first week of opening Sunda, my house got broken into and they stole the laptop. And again, I didn't back it up. I just didn't learn. So like I had like over 100 recipes, and it was like hundreds, if not thousands of hours working on these recipes, researching. And yeah, it was like another tough blow, but like I kind of just, every time something like that happens, I'm like, you know what, like maybe it's a good thing. Maybe if I just stayed, in that mind frame and using those same recipes, we might not evolve the way I want it to. So I guess when we first opened, it was, casual fine dining. It was, there was still an a la carte menu. And, I wanted to use a lot of native ingredients because at one point when I was doing my intern at Noma, I asked Rene Redzepi, why does he do all foraging and all that kind of stuff? And he says, that's just who he is. The food, like, you got to cook, in a way to show who you are. So, I'm Vietnamese Australian, and I was born and grew up in Australia. So I need to kind of cook, Southeast Asian food with native ingredients, and that would be me. And he's like, no one else can be you. Like, you're unique to yourself. And like, if you just cook like that, you would always, find inspiration and be better. So yeah, so Sunda is a Southeast Asian restaurant. We've just turned into a set menu only restaurant. And yeah, I love using native Australian ingredients. I think the main reason is because with Asian food, there's obviously a lot of it is about balance, sweet, sour, salty, spicy, and a lot of native ingredients are either bitter or sour. And by using a native ingredients in place of lime or, acidic ingredient to balance it out, it really works. And when I first started cooking using native ingredients, I was really surprised of how well it worked with Asian food. And I guess like Kylie Kwong was also one of the inspirations behind using native ingredients as well. And yeah, that's what Sunda is today.
You mentioned about that you're Australian born with Vietnamese heritage. What's it like translating Vietnamese cuisine in an Australian context and finding your own voice in your food? Is there challenges involved?
I think like when I was talking to Tan Hong at one point, and I told him I wanted to do a refined Vietnamese restaurant, one of his tips was, if you can't do it better than the original, don't do it at all. And that kind of stuck with me. But I guess the food at Sunda, I mean, some of the dishes are based on a traditional dish, but the end result is nothing like the traditional dish, if that makes sense. Like, for example, another one of our signature dishes, the otter otter. So it's traditionally like a fish cake that's, shaped into like a rectangle, wrapped in banana leaf, and then grilled. But our version is so the fish cakes is like curry flavored. So our one, I make a seafood curry base and set it into a parfait, top it with crab. So that's the like Indonesian Malaysian influence, right? And then it's also garnished with finger lime, which is the native Australian ingredient that we use in it. And there's also like sweet fish sauce gel over the top of that, and that's obviously a staple in Vietnamese cooking. So I guess every single dish can have influences from all around Southeast Asia, but not actually being that dish, if that makes sense.
At the top of the show, we mentioned briefly that you will be opening a new restaurant. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So the new restaurant is called Aru. That's ARU. So the name is named after a group of islands that is based near Indonesia, northern to the north of Australia, and they used to like do trade, like the Makan people, which is like the Indonesians back before European settlement, used to actually trade with the Aborigines, and we chose that name because in that time, like the main source of cooking was cooking over fire, and there was a lot of preserving and fermenting and all those kind of fun things, I guess. And we wanted to base a restaurant around that. So the restaurant is going to be based a lot over cooking over direct flame. We will do a lot of preserving and fermenting. Hopefully we're going to have like suckling pig on the menu that's been dry aged and roasted, on the bone. So it all kind of came about where I love roasting like ducks and pigs and stuff, right? And yeah, that's kind of going to be the main focus point for that restaurant.
At the top of the show, we talked about the incredible things you've been doing with pate en croûte and the pork Wellington with the Crackling, replacing the pastry lattice work. Pork is so integral in many Southeast Asian cuisines, particularly Vietnamese. What's some of the things that you use pork for on the menu?
So at the moment we offer two menus. One of it is the Sunda Classics menu, and the other one is the full Sunda Experience menu. And by coincidence, both of the main dishes is pork at the moment. So for the Sunda Classics menu, we've got pork cutlet that we marinate in rainforest tamarind, and then we sous vide it at 57 degrees. And then we basically just burn it on the grill. Like we char it to the maximum, and if we don't char it enough, we put out the blowtorch and we torch it so it's like even more charred. But like it's just so delicious because there's so much sugars in the marinade that caramelizes, so it doesn't taste like a burnt piece of meat, but it just tastes like a deep caramel that's slightly bitter and rich. So that gets garnished with like a rhubarb and rainforest tamarind jam. And then the other main course for the full experience menu is again pork, but this time pork belly. So it's a bit fattier. We dry age it for a week upstairs, and then we cure it in wattle seed salt. And then that again gets slow cooked overnight for 12 hours, and then gets grilled. That gets garnished with like a raspberry sauce. And I think with pork, fruits always work really well with it, like apple, plum, raspberries. There's something sharp and acidic to cut through that fattiness. Kind of always wins for me, I guess.
You mentioned numerous occasions through your career when you've had chances to move up the ranks, but you're nervous about leading people and whether it was the right time to be a leader in brigades. What's it been like for you being in a kitchen and part of a team and then moving to lead one?
Yeah, so I guess like for me, when I started cooking, I kind of set a timeline for myself, and I told myself I wanted to be a head chef by the time I was 25. And by the time I reached 25, I had job offers like from Vietnam, from London, like a lot of people that I've worked with that moved on to move overseas tried to get me to open restaurants with them. But finally, like I wanted to be a head chef by the time I was 25, but right up until I was 26, 27, I had all these offers, but I told myself I wasn't ready. But I guess I was sous chef for a while. Like I was sous chef at Mr. Wong for 3 years, and then with the Bentley Group, I was sous chef there for almost 2 years, 1.5 years, and I kind of always try to approach it in a way where I need to be that guy where I can build relationships with the team, where they can approach me with issues. And for a long time, when I was sous chef, that's what it was like. So, people, when they screwed something up, they wouldn't go to the head chef. They would come to me because I was like the good cop, right? And I would try to figure it out with them, and we'll figure it out and try to fix it and make it work. And I was like, when Sunda opens, I'm going to carry on and being that good cop, and going to be that nice guy where people can come to me about anything, issues in their personal life. They can come and talk to me about it. But when Sunda opened, I just turned into a totally different person, like the total opposite. Like I was I admit that I was a bit horrible because there was so much weight on my shoulder, because I moved to Melbourne and I have nothing. I moved here with like a duffel bag with clothes, and I was like, I can't fail. So whatever happens in the restaurant, it would always be my fault. Like if something screwed up, it'd be my fault. So there was just so much pressure on me to make it work because I didn't want to fail. And I think it took me a good maybe 6 months to a year where I kind of realized that I need to stop being an asshole. Like, I mean, my chefs respected me and they stayed with me, but it just wasn't sustainable. And that's when I kind of just spent more time outside of the kitchen and sat down with them to actually talk about things. I think one of the biggest thing at Mr. Wong where I took away from it was when I left, one of the things they asked me was, if you were to do it again, what would you have done differently? And I said I wanted to sit down with all the chefs and have a conversation with them. But I never ended up doing it, right? But they were like, before you leave, I want you to do just that. And it sounds simple, but I only had like less than a month left. There was over 40 chefs that I had to catch up with, which was tough. But when you sit down with a person and just talk to them openly, like they just open up in a way where you can't get that when you're like, if you're just standing in the kitchen and prepping and talking, like they won't open up to you. But when you actually sit down and have that conversation, you will notice a lot of things, and they will tell you a lot of things that you didn't know in the past. So I started doing that with my team at Sunda, and again, like I learned a lot of things about my staff, about what they do outside of work, about their struggles outside of work. And I think when you kind of understand that, people don't just come to work, because I don't know, for me, when I was younger, I came to work and whatever happened outside of work, it's outside of work. And I just worked my ass off, put my head down. It didn't matter what I was doing. I wanted to do it the best I could do it. But then, not everyone is the same and not everyone's like me. So I eventually learned that I have to, work through these struggles or these difficulties that my staff have outside of work with them. And, it's only made the relationship a lot stronger as we grow.
Well, Khanh, you are an amazing leading light in Australia's new wave of dining, and it's been an absolute honour to have you on the Crackling today.
Thank you very much.
Please keep in touch, and we very much look forward to seeing what you do with Aru and the future success of Sunda. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you. Great chat to you.
This is The Crackling, a Deep in the Weeds production in partnership with PorkStar. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we catch up with some of Australia's best chefs and pork producers to discover what makes Australian pork so special.